I want to welcome everybody to our TED Talk for tonight. What Will I Tell My Son by Scott Neeley. And I just found out earlier this week that Scott is actually with us tonight. So not only will we have a moderator, but we'll have the gentleman himself if we have in-depth questions. I'm Paula Ludwig. I'm with the Atlantic Institute. And the Atlantic Institute's vision is of a peaceful world. And we feel that by doing dialogues, conversations, having cultural events, that by just understanding different people and different cultures, that we will have less conflict in the world. I'm going to show a short 2-minute video about the Atlantic Institute, and then we are going to start the program for the night. I'm going to ask everybody if you will mute yourself so that you can hear this program.
The Atlantic Institute is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting harmonious coexistence between peoples of various cultures, faiths, and backgrounds. We seek this goal through peaceful dialogue, education initiatives, and community organization. Our dialogue events bring together experts, community and faith leaders, and knowledge seekers to address social issues that affect us all. We feel dialogue is the most important element in peaceful coexistence, so we try and maintain several panel discussions, TED Talk events, and book clubs throughout the year. These events touch on social issues, race relations, and cultural understanding, and are a mainstay of our program. The Atlantic Institute's education events are extremely important to our mission of understanding. We want to promote socially forward critical thinking to students of all ages. To that end, we have developed programs that seek to grow the creative spirit of students and help them think about their communities and the world around them. Our Future Leaders of Dialogue event brings together nominated elite students to learn from each other as well as political and business leaders. Our art and essay contest gives students a theme about important societal issues and allows them to create wonderful works of art and writing while steering their minds towards improving their world. We're always seeking ways to educate youths and adults in order to make a peaceful world for all of us. Our community events are designed to transform neighbors into friends and groups of people into a community. By associating with other nonprofits or by our own initiative, we are always trying to discover new avenues to improve our neighborhoods, places of worship, and community centers. We host cooking demonstrations of food from other cultures, work with various nonprofits to help elevate the work of others, and try to find a way to make the lives of those who are disenfranchised or marginalized better. Building a more peaceful world starts in our backyards, so we are dedicated to improving our communities and associations. The Atlantic Institute is always seeking like-minded volunteers and collaborators. If you would like to learn more, find volunteer opportunities, or just want to chat with our staff, please visit our website at www.atlanticinstitutesc.org or follow us on Facebook. We will never run out of fun, educational, peaceful events. So come, join us to help make this world a better place full of understanding and unity.
Steve, would you like to say anything before I start the TED Talk?
Yes, the quality of that first was poor. So I hope that the TED Talk comes across, at least on my screen, it was jumping and the sound was not too good. The other people, was it that way on yours? The same? So I hope the TED Talk is smoother and clearer. But I understand we had over 30 people registered for this. I'm disappointed that the others were not able to attend, but we'll have a quality experience. Scott Neeley, the presenter of the TED Talk, is I'm grateful to say with us. He is the minister at the Unitarian Church in Spartanburg. And I see a hand raised. Is there a question? You're on mute.
You have to make sure that when you do it, that you're gluing them the right side, so that because if you had glued these this way instead of this way, then you would have had to turn it when you trained it, which you can. It's not that big a deal, but yeah. Sorry about that. That was another video going on.
Okay, so okay, so we'll watch the TED Talk. We'll watch the TED Talk now, and then we'll engage with Scott. Scott, okay. Thank you for being here.
This is Friday, April 10th, 2015. This is South Carolina. Last Saturday, a black man was shot in the back 8 times by a white police officer. And I want to speak with you about race. This is my great-grandmother, Mamie Lawton Neeley, a wonderful, beautiful, little old lady in her rose garden. I visited her grave this morning to ask her forgiveness for the story I'm about to tell you. I guess I'll find out in a few years whether she did forgive me. Mamie Lawton Neeley grew up on a plantation with sharecroppers who were freed slaves in the lower part of this state. In the 1960s, my grandfather and my great-grandmother were sitting in the living room. They were watching television, the news about the civil rights movement. And my grandfather, who was very uncomfortable with the civil rights movement, turned to my great-grandmother and said, "Mama, if your daddy had hoed his own cotton, we wouldn't be in this mess." And my great-grandmother turned to my grandfather and she said, "My child, your grandfather could never have hoed all that cotton by himself. Why, at the start of the day, he'd take 100 darkies and set each one on a row. He'd send them down that row. And at lunchtime, he'd meet them at the end of the row with a lunch wagon and turn them around and set each of them on another row until they worked their way back that night. That was one day's work." Now, my great-grandmother was a good woman. She loved her family. She was devout. She worked hard. She ran a school for the black children on that plantation, out of the plantation house. She was a good woman. But she was part of an economic system, the injustice of which she could not see. She could not imagine something different. And there was some truth in what she said. There's no way my great-great-grandfather could have hoed all that cotton by himself. But she didn't ask why it was happening in the first place. What is racism? This is a picture of the freed slaves who were sharecroppers on my great-grandmother's plantation. We don't have a picture of these people, but they were there. The plantation wouldn't have worked without them. Their lives mattered, and their lives matter now. What is racism? There are really four kinds. The first is discrimination. This is out and out bigotry. This is my great-grandmother saying darkies, and we know that that is mild. These are the comments that are made in the shadows at cocktail parties. And if you think those comments don't matter, look yourself in the mirror and hurl insults at yourself for a little while. See what it does to you. But there's another form of racism, a second form that's very difficult to see. It's privilege. Privilege is the simple fact that we live in a society where being white, particularly a white man, is the norm. And for white folks, there are instances upon instances, 1,000 knives of privilege that we can't even see because it's just the way that life is. When I go in a store, I don't think twice about whether the clerks are looking at me. But when my black friends go in a store, they are followed. Why? Privilege is my great-grandmother believing that it was okay for all of those sharecroppers to work that plantation without ever wondering if she could have been in their place. Privilege is the acceptance of a system where I'm entitled to everything good, even if other folks might not be. The third form of racism is even deeper. It's structural racism. We live in a society built on the values in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution of freedom, of liberty, the right to pursue happiness. If you are white and a man and you own property. Every generation, we realize somebody got left out, and we amend our laws in order to achieve more fully the ideals that we've set for ourselves. But from the foundation of our society, we built a world that was not fair to everyone. Not only not fair, but that purposefully exploited some of our own. Structural racism is the fact that those freed slaves on my great-grandmother's plantation once were not free, and that was legal. But the fourth form of racism is the most difficult. It's the most insidious, it's the most infectious, and it's the one that we have to tackle with everything we've got. The fourth form of racism is that race itself is a fiction. Race is a lie that we tell ourselves day after day, year after year, generation after generation. There's no such thing as a black person or a white person. We are all much more complicated than that, genetically and ancestrally. When we talk about Latinos or people of Asian American descent, we immediately jump out of that framework already. Race is a fiction that was made up to categorize people for the purpose of social isolation and economic exploitation. So what do we do about it? This is my son, Ben. Ben is watching right now. Ben is the smartest 6-year-old that ever walked the face of the earth. With the possible exception of Jesus Christ. I can say that because I work at a church. Unfortunately for Ben, in 2 years, his sister Ann will be the smartest 6-year-old to ever walk the face of the earth. But he'll be 8 by then. He'll be okay. Ben goes to a wonderful school, a wonderful public school in Spartanburg. He has one of the best 5K teachers to ever grace the halls of an elementary school. It's a fantastic school. And one day Ben came home from school, popped in the door, and I said, Ben, what did you learn at school today? And he said, we learned about Martin Luther King Jr. And I said, oh, really? What did Martin Luther King Jr. do? And Ben said, with the same amount of fervor, he fought racism. I said, that's fantastic. What is racism? And Ben, in 5K, 6 years old, said, I don't know. Now, that's wonderful. He's 6 years old, and he doesn't know. That's the ideal, right? That's the dream. But that is not the reality. It's also danger. That is his privilege, not to know. Now, his teacher is doing a good job. She's teaching him the story. And his school is providing the support for that. But I'm his dad. I have to teach him. Racism is our inheritance. What is my legacy to him? What will I teach my son? I'm going to teach him about these people. This is a group that meets once a month to talk about race. It's called Speaking Down Barriers. It's led by a genius of a person named Marlanda Dekine. And this group gathers to have deep, honest conversations about race every month, month after month. These people have taught me 3 ways to face racism. They are simple enough for a 6-year-old. The first is to listen. The first way we get into this is to break the social isolation that is the world built around us, the way our cities are built, the way our churches work, the way our lives are constructed. We spend time with people who are different than we are, and we just listen. We don't have to believe everything that they say. We don't have to agree with them. We don't even have to like them, but we listen to them. The second thing that we do is to share. If racism is a system built for the purpose of economic exploitation of a group of people, it's about greed. It's about taking more than I need to the exclusion and the neglect of other people. And the very simple solution to that, simple enough for a 6-year-old, is to share. At the end of every monthly meeting of this group, people stand up and they talk about opportunities, resources. They pass around donuts. They share what they have for the benefit of everyone. What I teach Ben and his sister Ann is we share everything. That breaks the economic isolation. There's a third thing that we have to do. You've got to rethink. Race is a lie that we have told ourselves now for centuries. But it is not who we are. And we've got to figure out who we are as individuals and as families and as a whole people. Listen, share, and rethink. When I was preparing this presentation, I spent some time talking with Ben. He's watching right now. And I said, Ben, I want to tell some stories about you. Is that okay? Yeah, it's okay, Dad. I want to show some pictures of you. Is that okay? It's okay, Dad. But last night, his mother walked through the slides with him, showed him these pictures. And I spoke with him on the phone. And I said, Ben, I'm going to do this presentation. Is that okay? I don't know what I would have done if he had said it wasn't. He said, yeah, it's okay. I know. And I said, I want to tell these stories about you, okay? He said, it's all right. I said, do you know what I'm going to say? And he said, little CEO that he is, you tell them, get rid of racism. I'm not laughing. Racism is our inheritance. It doesn't have to be our legacy, but we better do something about it. Break the social isolation and listen. Break the economic exploitation and share. And rethink who we are, because this isn't it. Thank you.
Okay, I hope that my computer stays on. I disappeared there, I know, because my computer lost connection. I hope that does not happen again. Scott, when they asked me to do one of these things and to pick a TED Talk, I was familiar with your talk and I found it so rich that I wanted to use it, and I'm sure others do. I have a number of questions, and then we'll ask other people to be engaged in this. But let me ask you, that was several years ago. What has changed in your mind since then? I mean, is there something that you wish that you had said, or something that you wish that you had said differently?
Well, first, thank you all for letting me be here tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you for engaging with the video, with the talk. Just thank you. Something that I would have done differently. Let me answer that in two ways. The first to say, not much. And the reason that I say that is that I think a lot of what was shared there is still all too true. And there certainly are many other ways to say it, but I think those ways speak to the truth of our lives. And the way in which the talk was prepared was involved a lot of people, a lot of talking with colleagues, with friends, with my family, as you hear in the talk. A lot of preparation and thinking about what to say and how to say it, and thinking through my own blind spots. And that thoroughness of preparation and of dialogue that created that talk, I think, created something that has had some lasting value. So I'm grateful for that. I think if I were to change anything, it would be to insist more on the root of all of this, in my view. And that is something that my continuing work with Speaking Out Barriers, which I'm still very involved in every week, has really sharpened. So as a team, in the dialogues and trainings that we do when we speak about racism, we share a definition of racism that that tries to name the historical root of racism in our country and in the Americas. And what we say is that racism is power for the sake of greed. Power for the sake of greed. Something like that is said in the video, but not so succinctly. And there's just a clarity about that power for the sake of greed that illuminates our history and all the symptoms of racism that we live with. So I would like to have insisted on that more.
Yeah, that would be good. Toward the end of your video, the presentation there, you said this is not who we are, there was something in me that came back at that and said, I'm afraid that is who we are. That's exactly who we are. The people, the attack on January the 6th of the Capitol, there were people that said, this is not who we are, but that's what we did. That's who we are.
Yes, I'll speak to that if it's okay. In our gatherings, we have a participant who will often say we have to go through the ugly to get to the beautiful. And we can't jump over the ugly. It's just too much a part of us and our lives. And I think you're absolutely right that the things I described are who we are. When I say it's not who we are, I'm saying something aspirational and also something real, not just imaginary, is that this is all a fiction with real world consequences. So as human beings, this is what we've created, but it is not fundamentally what our human being is. It's not what our humanity is fundamentally. And that's what I was reaching for. It's worth noting that the end of that talk was not scripted. It wasn't part of the plan. And I don't do a good job of showing my temper, but I had really gotten very angry just because of the content and the murder of Walter Scott right before the presentation and just all of it. And when I shared the story about Ben telling us to end racism, the whole room laughed, which I understand. I don't mean to lay fault there, but it absolutely exploded inside of me that I had left the room laughing when a man had just been shot in the back 8 times. And so, as I say, it's poorly expressed because I'm too reluctant to show all of my anger. But I was trying to say something to push us.
Right. So others, please ask questions or make comments. Steve, Caroline, Nancy, Paula.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I attend the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia. So, hey, Scott. Hey, Paula. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. I've been attending these monthly meetings through the Richland County Library that's been doing a series on So You Want to Talk About Race. So talking about a book that someone wrote by that title. And those have been very informative. And this one in particular, what got my attention was the title of this, What Shall I Tell, or what can I tell my son? I went to an art exposition in Greenville, that had magnificent artwork of, it was by an African-American man. It was just so beautiful. And I just sat there and wept in the museum itself. I was just so moved by it. And I called my friend who I happened to be meeting later on that afternoon, who happened to be African-American. And I said, you got to come see this. And so she came and we experienced it together, and we both were weeping and very emotional. And she said, Nancy, I don't know if you really get it, but I had to have that conversation with my son. And I was like, what? I didn't know what she was talking about. That was like probably 6 years ago now. But I've made it a point to be more and more aware. And that does hit home, that we don't have to have that conversation. I didn't even know what conversation she was talking about. So, so thank you for bringing this to us to this awareness. And I loved it how you put it so succinctly and very clear and passionately to say, no, we're not joking about this. We've got to somehow intercede. I loved how you said doesn't have to be a legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Others, please.
Sure, I had a question. I'm the executive director of the Palmetto Project. And for many years, we've done a lot of cutting edge stuff. I would consider it cutting edge in race and race relations and communities in South Carolina. We've always been fortunate to have a good balance of African Americans and white people and Native Americans and Asians in our conversations. Had any of you ever participated in a conversation of all white people talking about race? It seems to me that white people are really the reason we have racism for the most part in South Carolina. And it's sort of up to us to figure out how to get out of this, or how to take some responsibility or leadership. And it's a different conversation than you have with a multiracial group, for sure. But at the same time, and I actually have done this, I have gotten just the white leadership of a community together. These are horrible conversations, I have to tell you. And the sad thing is, most of the people in the room don't realize how horrible they are. I've often thought, I wish there was some program that we could undertake where the people who seem to have all the power in a racist society talk about racism and figure out, and even just talk about consequences for all of us. What is it? What's the price we're all paying for the system staying in place? I don't have an answer for it, but, and maybe that sounds like maybe that's a silly idea, but it's I'm just astonished when we have these white conversations about race. It's a whole different world. One lady said, she was in a rural county, and she was a very distinguished, influential Caucasian woman in that community. And she said she used words like niggeras, which, as I tried to explain to her, maybe that's not the best term to be using, but she said, we've done everything we can. We've invited them to come to our school and to have conversations with us. And I said, well, let's break it down. Where's your school? And well, it's the Robert E. Lee Academy, and they have this brand new library, the Stonewall Jackson Library. So so it took quite a bit of conversation to kind of suggest that maybe this was viewed by people who were not white as being a very hostile environment, not one that would be welcoming, not one that they would feel comfortable expressing themselves. And it took a long time just to get the first base on that one. So I don't know if any of you have had experiences like that or not, but I'd be interested to know what they were.
Steve, I do want to say one thing. I can get how uncomfortable they were, but let me just say, you had them. Conversations were had, and words were spoken, and things were said that were uncomfortable. Things were said that were wrong, but things were addressed, and they were said out loud. And that's some things that, some words that I use a lot is, at least you can say them out loud. They may not come out right. They may not come out at the right time, but that gives you time to know when is the right time and explore, because we're people and we have to understand. And if we don't learn, then we don't grow, and we don't know what we can teach our son, right, Scott? We don't know what we can pass along. And if we don't have that opportunity, then the next generation's going to be just as screwed up as we've been. And then we're going to just pass along that same hate and that same assumption. And let me also say that same, can't say that, can't do that, can't talk to them, can't go down that path, can't open that door. And then there's that separation where it is us and them, or whatever separation that there is between people who don't feel comfortable around each other. But when you have those uncomfortable conversations, that's when you open the door. And so, I mean, be it in a room full of all white people or in a room full of people that our mixed, backgrounds and religions. Religions are in there too, but race relations as well. But I think just saying things out loud, and sometimes that's the only time that some people are comfortable, is when they're in the room full of people that they feel like they can say those things. And that's a good way to kind of say, listen, that's just not the way you can talk anymore. And it never really was a way you should have talked to begin with, but let's just shut it down now. So, and I'm sorry, I'm Caroline Robertson.
you.
I didn't go there yet. I
Okay.
actually am an executive director of Greer Relief. And hi, Scott. Been a
Caroline,
minute.
good to see you. Steve
Good
and
to see
Caroline,
you as well.
appreciate what you're both saying. Steve, and the work that we do with Speaking Out Barriers, we convene affinity groups every month. And we have a group for people of the African diaspora called Healing Us, a group for members of the Latinx community called Seeing Us, and gathering for folks of European descent called Learning Us. And you can hear that the valence of those groups is not the same. They're different from each other. But we have found it to be very powerful to convene those groups where folks have a shared identity, because there's a level of truth telling that happens that is very hard to have happen when it's a group that's multiracial or multi-ethnic or whatever the multi-dimension is. And we started doing that because we were convening these community gatherings, which are wonderful, but we found that folks were having trouble really hearing each other, and not kind of, especially white folks, kind of, dumping themselves in other people or taking up a lot of space with perspectives. And so we started to convene these affinity groups, create safe space for some folks, and a kind of raw, honest space for other folks, so that when we got into the community gatherings, we weren't hurting each other. We could really be there with each other. I think part of what we've seen in the Learning Us group with white folks, it's just what you say. We're born into this privilege. We're born into a system of power. And we have been taught not to see it so that it can replicate itself. If we saw it clearly, I think we would be horrified and perhaps try to do something about it. Maybe that's too hopeful, but I do hope that anyway. But I think part of the way white supremacy works is that it teaches us not to see it, so that we just keep living in that privilege and getting offended anytime that gets named. A lot of what we've tried to do is to help one another see more clearly our history and how we show up in the world, how the world benefits us, and then just to open up our imaginations, because our imaginations have been just stunted. So to learn to listen, that there are stories and lives that are different than our own and that are just as valid, and that may have something important to say to us, and to learn to share, right? That there is a tremendous disproportionate distribution of resources in our country and our world, those people. And if we want to build a different kind of world, we have to share those resources. But we have not been taught how to imagine how that works very well. And ultimately just to reimagine who we are. So Steve, I just thank you for convening those groups, because it sounds very parallel to much of what we've done, and I found it to be effective, especially when it's done on repeat. Showing up again and again is a big factor.
All right. Yeah. And Paula, if I disappear again, let me back in, please. All right, Steve Dowdy, you were going to say something.
There we go. I want to come both with a statement of experience, but also then a question, and it's around the matter of anger and the creative use of anger. Because I think there really are times we need, or I found I need to do that. Scott, I appreciated that you were angry and let that go. And it's not a matter of just out of the system, but it's sometimes that's the only thing we can do. We were in a situation not long ago where we were absolutely thrilled to see some conversations growing that we were privileged to be a part of in a place where it was all white, but it was a place where those conversations had not been. And there was a desire on the part of some leadership to let it become a part of that group. And then all of a sudden, when things were happening, they just stopped. The organization of them stopped. Nothing more came. We would make input. We would get ideas, something's going to happen, and nothing. And we know there was severe pushback against it. And finally, the only thing we could do, and we've moved from that area now, but was express to people who we know there are some who hold feelings that we do and are in authority and can have the courage to at least let people talk about these things, was to express our disappointment and our bewilderment at what had happened. And that's anger. And that only, that's a closed door in a sense for us. We're not a part of that anymore. But we're a part of a larger picture, and if people hear anger from somebody that they least have trusted for a little while, maybe that becomes a part of it. Scott, I'd be interested in your thoughts on anger. It has to be calculated. As a pastor, I'd use it occasionally and sometimes totally out of control, and it did nothing. But sometimes if I knew what I was saying, at least there was a chance. I'm interested in your use of anger.
Well, as I've already said, I'm not very good at using it, but I do feel it a lot, and I'm sure the two things are intimately intertwined. But I appreciate your example very much, Steve, and that you were willing to do that. Marlanda, who's the founder of Speaking Out Barriers, used to often tell the story of flipping tables in the temple. Not as a story of devotion or piety, but a story of being prophetic and being justice oriented, justice acting. I agree with you in large part that it's good to calculate use, but we're talking about 500 years of murder and exploitation. We're talking about 2 genocides, millions of Native American people killed and land lost, and millions of African people killed and lives enslaved. And that's only to speak about our country, not even both continents in our hemisphere, and not about the world. And when I say this, I'm not trying to be gloomy or blaming. I'm just trying to name reality. And that is a reality that is so hard to name, and that we put forward bills, we put forward legislation to try to hold down that history, that it can't be shared and taught, is, I think, good reason for outrage. That it would be better for us to legislate lying to ourselves than to just tell the truth and deal with it. It's no way to build a people. And so, Steve, I don't know that I've got a good technique to share, but I think you're right. Sometimes we need to let the anger be expressed, because what has happened is absolutely outrageous. And we may not have started it, but we're born into it. As soon as you set foot on the soil of this country, you're part of it. And therefore we have responsibility in it. And if that kind of history doesn't make us angry, then we're numb.
Scott, are you through with that?
Yes, I think that's
okay. I thought that your dissection of racism was very helpful to delineate 4 different types and 4 different manifestations, as opposed to just a monolithic thing out there, racism, but that it does have different manifestations, different expressions. That was very helpful. A comment kind of question. Robert Jones, who is one of the speakers that we have hosted in our Anderson Forum for Progressive Theology, does research on the church. And in your description of what racism is, its different expressions, he documents that the church and Christianity provided the architecture for all this. And if it had not been for Christianity, it would not have happened. Can Christianity and church survive without racism? Can racism survive without Christianity and church? And I'm talking about the Christianity that's been nationalized. I'm not talking about the authentic message of Jesus. I think there was a true, authentic message of Jesus about justice, but I'm talking about what we are experiencing now. Can the church survive without racism?
Well, I think it depends on, as you're already saying, I think it depends on what church we're talking about. Some of our churches evolved as a form of resistance to racism, the AME movement, for example. And I think that we always have a choice about how we're going to live our lives and what we're going to do with our institutions. I don't mean that naively. Don't start from scratch. And I think the research that you name is very right. If we look back at papal bulls at the beginning of the conquest of the Americas, what we see is a whole ideology of imperialism and race in service to that. And we know that the importation of African slaves came about because of advocacy on the part of a Dominican friar, because the Native Americans in the Caribbean were dying by the droves through the form of forced labor and enslavement the Spanish imposed on them. That's how the proposition of bringing African slaves began. So there's no question that Christianity is deeply wrapped up in this, and continues to be. Christian nationalism is an enormous problem in our country now, and it is wrapped up in white supremacy. I do think that it's also a key to resistance. Karen Armstrong does a beautiful job of this in a book called Fields of Blood. And if you'll allow me a moment to offer a brief dissertation on her book. She's a scholar of religion, and what she does in this book is to chart the development of civilization around the world from the agrarian revolution to today. And she circles the globe looking at civilizations and their development from Mesopotamia to India to China and so forth around the world. And her main goal with this book, which is just brilliantly written, is to show the pattern of the way that religion is used in the service of economic and political exploitation. If you're going to have an agrarian revolution, you need a few people making decisions about calendars and tides and floods, and a lot of people. You need a big labor force and people in charge of labor in order to develop that. And so we have, as civilizations, calculated an acceptable level of violence in order to have the lifestyle that we want. There are a certain number of people whose lives we're willing to crush in order to have the life that we want. And that's true today, probably for the clothes that we're all wearing. It's probably true. The foods that we eat. What Armstrong shows is that religion is in service to this. That priests, those who keep time and rituals, do that in service to king, aristocrat, military, whomever, so that religion is in service to economics and politics for the sake of But she also shows that in every age, there is a small group of people who claim the same ideals espoused by the religion and who say, we are not living our ideals, this is not right. And they form alternative communities of resistance. At first, they don't matter at all. Then when they gain a little bit of power, they get killed. But over time, their vision continues. And they do have the power to transform their societies until they are so successful that they themselves are the ones that get co-opted into the structure of politics. And then it takes a new alternative group to form. And we can think, for example, of the movement from radical religion, not only for radical European religion, but radical African religion, Black religion, leading to an organized abolition movement, and then more radical elements in abolition that push that movement, moving up to other forms of religion, the civil rights era, and not only Christians in the civil rights area, but Muslims in the civil rights area, and Jews who were such an essential part of the civil rights movement, until the gains of the civil rights era were realized. But then we can see the way in which religion has lost a lot of its power, co-opted, that a lot of the lip service that's paid doesn't do anything good, until the very gains of the civil rights era are largely gutted by subsequent laws and rulings. Right. And so we can see that pattern in our own country. So Steve, after that long rehearsal, I would say there's no question that religion is wrapped up in this, and we don't need to be naive. But I also think that religion can be a powerful force in this, and our history attests to that as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to honor the hour. Closing comments, questions? Any others?
I would follow what I just said to you with just one last comment, which is, I think what matters is to try to see reality for what it is. Historical reality and social reality, and also spiritual reality, however we name that. And when we have the courage to live in reality, we can change things. But there is a tremendous pressure and temptation to live in a lie, as long as it serves us.
Oh, that may I advertise something that is in keeping with what Scott was just talking about. The Anderson Forum for Progressive Theology this coming Sunday is going to host Kirsten Cobes-Dumais, the author of Jesus and John Wayne. It's an online presentation at 3:00. And in the title of her book is Jesus and John Wayne, How the Evangelicals Have Corrupted the Christian Faith. I would advertise that if you're interested in that. And you can go find that, how to register for that on our website, Anderson Forum for Progressive Theology. Paula, thank you. And Scott, thank you very much. I wish that the 30 people who registered had been able to hear this. This is such important, critically important information and a critically important topic. But as you say, it's the narrow way, it's the small group of people. Most people are not interested. I mean, just not interested. As important as it is. But you want to say anything about the answer to your question? What shall I teach my son?
I was going to pose that question as well. And is it different from what we would have wanted? My son is 33 years old, but he's getting ready to have twin boys. And what is the message that we want those little boys to walk away with? And is it different from what we've done ourselves?
I'll offer a generational answer. My parents did teach me about racism, and they taught me that everyone is equal, to love everyone the same. And I think that is a beautiful and necessary message. I think that is the message of being humane. I teach my son that same message, and I teach him to see our history and what he's been born into. So I teach my son to love everybody and to see how terribly unequal the world is, to see the ugly and the beautiful.
Okay. A hard lesson. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Atlantic Institute. And thank you,
Steve.
participants. Scott, we wish you well.
Yes,
Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much for bringing this forward for us. And Scott, thank you for joining us. It's very rare that we get the speaker of one of these talks to actually come and talk with us afterwards. So thank you very much. I thank you, Steve, again. I am going to stop the recording now. You can continue conversations if you like. I'll leave the forum, the Zoom open, just in case you do, but I'm going to stop the formal presentation. We have several other, we have one other TED Talk out there that I'm aware of that we did last month. We have our Cuisine of Different Cultures classes that we're doing, and we have our Cultural Creation classes as well as other dialogue events that we've recorded and put on our YouTube channel. I suggest you go and subscribe. I think when you subscribe, it lets you know when we put new content out there. And this should be out there tomorrow or the next day on the YouTube channel if you want to share it with friends and family. So thank you all again. Scott, thank you very much. Steve, thank you as always, and I'll see you again soon. Oh, nope, nope.